Trucker Dump, episode 191. In today's show, we'll talk about how the trucking industry was a hot topic at the State of the Union address. We'll talk about how this futuristic trucking world isn't working out quite as expected. The FMCSA is staying super busy receiving and rejecting exemption requests. I'll tell you about a new restaurant chain at TA Restaurants, and I'll point you to a funny article written in a style you used to get here. In the listener feedback segment, we'll talk about way station apps, worn out tires, how best trucking fleet criteria works, and I'll point you to another trucking podcast I listened to recently that was recommended by a listener. And after much guilt-driven goading, I finally talk a listener into submitting a Trucker Grub segment. Well, sort of. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Trucker Dump, where you'll get one driver's insights and sometimes humorous views of truck driving and the trucking industry, and pretty much anything else he feels like dumping on you. This podcast is brought to you by AboutTruckDriving.com, resources to help you understand the world of truck driving through the use of stories and a pathetic attempt at humor.
Howdy doody, Trucker Dumpers. Well, you know, you've told me many times that you don't care anything about my audio quality, yet I continually obsess about it. So today, I'm going to be right on your page. I'm not going to worry about it because it's cold in here and my little tootsies are freezing. I'm just going to let that old heater back in the background just cycle on whenever it wants. And I'm just not going to worry about it. Yeah, I'm going to worry about it. But I'll try not to say anything about it. Hopefully you won't be able to hear it too bad. So anyway, those of you new to the show, my name is Todd McCann. I'm a 25-year truck driver. Most of that has been over the road. Some of that with teaming with the evil overlord, who is my wife and ex-co-driver. Last 4 years or so, I've been doing LTL and really digging that quite a bit. I don't know how much longer I will be doing that, considering my job is, well, sketchy right now. We'll see. Hopefully we can just drag this out as long as possible. And honestly, I don't see myself going back over the road unless I get laid off or something like that. I might do it briefly, but I really like this LTL thing. I don't know, something about it I really like. If you are wondering why I like LTL so much, just head on back into the archives a little bit. I talked about this new job in LTL quite a bit, somewhere probably in early 2019. So go back and look at the dates on those. I don't have exact dates, but I talked a lot about it when I first started this job, which was in the spring of 2019. So anyway, what else? Well, if you're a longtime listener, you know there's no way possible we're getting through this intro without me talking about my trucking ebook combo pack. Yep, you can get 2 ebooks for the price of one right now. That's going through the end of February. So it looks like this week and next week will be the last. And if I remember to change that in the on my website, if I get really lazy and forget, then I guess that 50% discount will be up a little bit longer. But that's actually a good possibility if you know me at all and the way I procrastinate on things. But I plan on having that end at the end of February. So anyway, what are these books? One is called How to Find a Great Truck Driving Job. Just helps you figure out, the kind of job you're looking for, the hiring process, lots of different questions you can ask. It's a great resource for brand new truck drivers. And also there is a list of just questions in there. So if you are a longtime truck driver and you just want to have a thorough list, nice and handy, you can buy the book, or heck, you can even get that for like, I don't know, $1.99, something like that. I don't even remember what I charge for that anymore, but you can get that. If you have an interest for that, I don't have a link to it on the page, but you can. I probably should. Yeah, I need to add that to my how to contribute or how to help the show link that I put in. Yeah, I need to add that. Forgot all about it. So anyway, if you want that list before I get that put up in the help the show portion of the menu, then just give me a shout, truckerdump@gmail.com, and I will send that to you, and you can just get the list itself. That comes in handy if you already know why you're asking those questions. But if this is your first job in the trucking industry, you may want to get the book so you understand why you're asking those questions. The other book is called Trucking Life, and that explains basically what the trucking industry is all about. Kind of gives a example of me and the evil overlord and how our careers went. Lots of helpful tips, fun stories and stuff like that in there. And it goes all the way from what you can expect in the trucking industry to getting into training and how that all works and schools and all that stuff. So if you're interested in that, oh, by the way, there's also a 9.25 hour audiobook associated with trucking life, and that comes for free with the book. So again, if you want to check these out, about truckdriving.com, and click on the ebooks link up there in the menu. Or if you just want one of those books, you can go to Amazon or iBooks or Barnes & Noble, wherever you get your ebooks. So how's the world been treating you? We have had some wacky weather recently. I was listening to the Newsworthy podcast the other day, and she said that at one point right here in the United States, there was a temperature gap of 100, or not a gap, but a difference of 100 degrees, over 100 degrees. It was below not freezing, below zero up in some of the upper states, and in the southern states, it was like 90 degrees. So it's like, wow, that's just crazy. I got caught in a little bit of it, and much to my chagrin, it was because I was being a nice guy. Yeah, I'm sitting there in Indianapolis, and we're waiting, me and a few other drivers sitting around waiting on loads. And the guy dispatcher comes in and says, "Hey, I got a few loads here. Who was first?" And I said, "I was." And he said, "Well, I got a Nashville and I got a Grand Rapids." Well, I looked at the mileage book and said, "Well, Nashville's further. I'll take that." And then the guy sitting next to me goes, "Oh man, I was really hoping for that load. It's closer to home." And I said, "Well, you can have it. No big deal. I'm supposed to take the longest load. That's the way my company works. But hey, if both drivers are agreeable to switching up, they don't have a problem doing that." So I gave him the load. Right after I did it, another driver walked up to me and said, "Hey, you probably just screwed up because Grand Rapids is going to be in ice tonight." Well, he wasn't wrong. This is what happens when you don't ever look at the weather. I just take it as it comes. I'm not one of those weather watchers. And this time it bit me in the butt because I got to Grand Rapids just as the ice started, and I ended up getting a call that afternoon. I went to bed at like 11:45 a.m., something like that. And I got a call at 5 in the afternoon saying, "We're not running tonight. Just plan accordingly." Well, I didn't plan accordingly. I went ahead and slept, and I was up all night, and then they called me for like 1 o'clock that afternoon. So I went on very little sleep that day. But, sometimes that's just the breaks, I don't, with LTL or even with over the road, the way this works. Sometimes you don't know when to sleep. You don't know when they're going to call you, and you just take a risk and think, well, I'll sleep now, and hopefully they'll call me in, 10 or whatever hours, and you'll be on your way. Sometimes that backfires and you sleep for 8 hours, and then you're up for 10 hours. And then all of a sudden they want you to move. That may be what happens today as I'm recording this, because I messed up the other night by not getting sleep. And so I came into the hotel immediately this morning about, 4 in the morning, something like that, and crawled into bed. I got up at like noon and waiting on a call and haven't gotten one. So if it's like 10 o'clock tonight, I will be up for, 8 or 10 hours before I even get to work tonight. Well, that's just the risk we take as truckers, isn't it? Yeah. So anyway, the good news is, as a union worker, I do get paid for that layover time. I got 8 hours pay. So that was good. Can't complain about that too much. And the weather has gotten much, much, much nicer. Heck, by the time I got out of the hotel, up in Grand Rapids, there was still ice all over my truck, but it was melting rapidly because it had gone up to 37 degrees. So anyway, I hope you have escaped all of this stuff and you're staying down there in those southern states. So with that extremely long intro, let's say we just get on with the show. I think we've got fewer stories. Well, it's looking like we've got fewer stories unless something pops up on Friday that's just so vital that it cannot be avoided. But looks like, yeah, not a whole lot to cover here. So let's get started with the news. All right, let's start out with something I probably should have mentioned long before now. That was because on February 7th, the State of the Union address happened. Yeah, that's the big government thing where the president tells everybody, the press, big thing, all the Congress is sitting there, and, he's talking about all the things he's done, patting himself on the back, no matter what president it is, and, what their plans are for the future. And, normally I find these although it's relevant to this country, kind of boring. And a lot of times it's just like I said, a lot of backpacking. Back padding. That's what I meant to say. But I'm looking through the news over here at Transport Topics. That's ttnews.com. And I finally come across one that I think is, well, it's just not talking about the State of the Union, but it is the perspective of the State of the Union. Highlights from a gentleman named Dan Van Alstine. He is the chairman of the American Trucking Association, which is, of course, the ATA we all talk about. So he talks about here in this article that, a lot of times these State of the Unions don't really address trucking at all, even though we've had problems in this industry for quite a while. Well, this one really focused on trucking quite a bit. Of course, there's all the other stuff, all the other politics, the border thing, and, Ukraine and all that stuff to go along. But, it was really focused a lot on our infrastructure problems here in the United States. And of course, Biden's up there patting himself on the back for all the bipartisan, well, they say bipartisan. Well, I guess it passed, so I guess it kind of was the infrastructure law. And I do have to say that they have been, very, very, very busy with infrastructure, trying to get more parking, trying to get, safety issues worked out, trying to get the driver shortage, that's air quotes, sorted out, driver retention. They're working on all the predatory lease stuff going on with these independent contractors, just doing a lot. Well, we haven't seen a lot of results yet. I'm not going to have anything to say about the Democrats here, but there's been lots of studies going on. And there has been some money issued to different states and different organizations to, get some of this infrastructure going. But at least they are taking infrastructure seriously now. So some key takeaways here are we've got 38% increase in our nation's road and bridge funding. So that's always good. And Mr. Van Alstine here also talks about how many times the ATA has been requested to go into Congress, into these committees. And OIDA has been up there quite a bit too. The Owner-Operator Independent Driver Association, they've been up there quite a bit too, talking about industry stuff and the problems that we're having here. So anyway, he goes on to say, while this is great and they are looking at all this stuff and they're doing studies and they have money set aside for it, that they really need to make sure that the money goes to the right points, for freight bottlenecks, for new highway and bridge construction, for intermodal connectors and truck parking capacity. And they say that the Republican House majority has a vital role in this. They are the ones who are going to say where a lot of this money goes, so they better not screw that up. And here's something I had not heard about. The president actually cited the Bipartisan Ocean Shipping Reform Act. And that is supposedly going to go back and look at maritime port operations that have been in place for more than 20 years. It hasn't even been touched in 20 years. So that ought to maybe help out with the ports and things like that because, this past year, we know we had all kinds of problems out there in the ports. So anyway, if you're interested in this political kind of stuff, head on over to Transport Topics. That's ttnews.com. Check out this article. And, well, let's just hope that some of this all plays out and we actually get some things done with this administration. Speaking of the American Trucking Association, let's head over to thetrucker.com for this one. ATA president says California should not set nation's emissions standards. Boy, how many times have we said that here on this podcast? Well, he agrees with it, saying, yes, we may get to zero emissions at some point in the future, but right now, California pushing this thing as hard as they are and as big of as an influence as they have, they influence other states and everybody is pushing this thing way too fast. And it's just not going to get there in time. Some things you just can't rush, basically. He says to get to zero, we must be honest and transparent about the road ahead. Sourcing rare minerals needed for millions of 5,000-pound truck batteries, the infrastructure needed to charge them, and the additional electricity needed to power our trucks, full scale doesn't yet exist and won't if you allow California to set the nation's standard. Well, good for Mr. Speer. That's awesome. I hope he keeps on this because the ATA is a big player in the industry, and if they keep pushing it. Maybe it will happen. Although, this is California. They do what they want. And, that's sad. You can check out this short little article on thetrucker.com. And on the subject of infrastructure and electric vehicles, check out this one on freightwaves.com. Can charging infrastructure keep pace with EV demand? Short answer, no, it can't. Not in its current state. They've got a long way to go. Now, that's no news to us. We've talked about that quite a bit, but there were some interesting statistics. I hate that word, statistics. There were some interesting stats here in this article that I found I never really heard this before. So I guess in 2021, the U.S. hit a milestone. Great, now my toilet's making noises. So I guess in 2021, the U.S. hit a milestone of 5% of all new vehicle sales were electric vehicles. Now, keep in mind, that's all vehicle sales, including cars. Now, I know this podcast is mostly focused on trucks, but this is relevant here. So why is that 5% milestone so significant? Well, Norway, for example, is the poster child here. They hit 5% in 2014, and now, just 8 or 9 years later, they're at 88%. So 88% of their vehicles sold in Norway are electric vehicles. China crossed this 5% threshold in 2020, and just last year, 2 years later, they hit 29%. And now they're saying the U.S. is experiencing the same growth. Because in 2021, they hit the 5% milestone, and in 2022, we're already up to 12% of all new vehicle sales. Now, of course, the problem here is they point out that even though people want to buy these vehicles, they're ready to buy these electric vehicles, the infrastructure just doesn't exist yet here. So they could be selling a lot more of these electric vehicles, but who wants to mess with trying to get charged? I honestly couldn't tell you where one electric charger in all of Joplin is. That's where I live, or close to it anyway. And I'm trying to think, but I just can't think of where any of them are at. Restaurants even. Nope. I couldn't tell you where one of them's at. Of course, then again, I'm not really looking for them, so maybe they're around more than I think they are. But anyway, this just goes to show what we've been saying all along, that there is just a major problem with this. This is not going forward as quick as they think it is. They even point out in here that one worry is production of lithium, and that is in real short supply. So just as Mr. Spears said from the ATA when he was talking to Congress, that, we just don't have enough to make all these batteries and stuff. And another problem is China owns most of that stuff. And, well, do we really want to be beholden to China? Yeah, well, looks like we're going to be. If they bother to give it to us. That's a big thing they can hang over our heads. Yeah, maybe we ought not get in such a big hurry here. Another point here is that people say, well, we can, use hydrogen engines as a stopgap. Well, I think the hydrogen infrastructure is even less than the electric vehicle at this point. So, yeah, it may be an easier way to do it, but I'm not sure they can get to that either. They're way behind on all this stuff. So they just keep pushing forward the electric vehicles without the infrastructure. Real smart. Head on over to freightwaves.com for this one. Hey, guess what else is failing with the whole electric vehicle thing? Nikola. Yeah, we've talked about this company in the past. They make big, Class 8 trucks, and they've been a fairly big player. They were one of the early adopters of this, and looks like they are running out of money. This, according to a freightwaves.com article, they say they may run out of money in 12 months, and that is just from not getting enough funding. So even though everybody's trying to push this through, not enough people are putting money into this. They just don't see it probably being a big turnaround, a quick turnaround on their money. So they're just, not really investing in this. So it's looking like they may be out of the picture before too long. So, yep, another failure with electric vehicles. In related news, what about autonomous vehicles? Let's stick with freightwaves.com for this one. Reports say autonomous platooning startup Locomation closing its doors. Wow, look at that. An autonomous company closing its doors. Again, lack of funding. Now, if you're not familiar with Locomation, we've talked about them in the past. They are the company that was trying to do this platooning, where now platooning is two trucks really close together. They're linked together by a computer. So when the first one breaks, the second one knows to break, and they're drafting off each other. And they were planning on stringing long trucks of these together, long tractor trailers, combinations together. So it'd be, one truck, one trailer with each of these. And, they might have 5 or 6 of them in a link really close together, drafting off each other. And ideally, what their idea was, there would be an actual driver in the first one monitoring the system, but the driver in the second vehicle, if it was just two, that driver would be sleeping in the cab. And I remember I told you I wouldn't want that job, to be sleeping in a cab while it's 20 or 30 feet away from the trailer doors of a truck in front of it, and relying on a computer to make sure I don't die. No, thank you. So, of course, the idea behind that was, while that driver is sleeping, he'll get his 10-hour break, and then when the front driver runs out of time, they can just switch trucks, or the guy can move his truck to the front of the pack, and they can just continue on. Okay, sounds good in theory, sounds horrifying to me, but apparently everybody else thought it was a bad idea too, because they are going out of business for sure. This is not a maybe, possibly running out in 12 months. It just says this is already happening. They're laying people off big time, and it is closing the doors. Can't say as I'm all that disappointed about that, although I hate to hear anybody laid off and losing their job, but if it's a bad idea, it's a bad idea. Freightwaves.com if you want to read more about that one. All right, let's switch up subjects. You know how we've been talking lately about these ELDs that keep getting revoked? There was like 3 of them in a 2-week period. And I was saying, what's going on with this? Are they running some kind of a sting? Are they really focusing on this? Or what is going on? Well, there's an article over here on overdriveonline.com. Why FMCSA keeps revoking ELDs and how to tell if yours is next. So the FMCSA is not exactly commenting on this, but there is a gentleman here from Blue Ink Tech who is the provider of the BIT ELD, BIT. Never heard of that one either. But he says that what happens is that the inspectors have been getting better at checking the device itself. So, for instance, if you're if you get pulled into a weigh station and the officer has you transfer your hours data over to them through the internet, then the inspector is not just checking the driver, but they're also checking to see if the ELD itself is compliant. And I guess when they discover little things that are wrong with it, they will send off a like a detailed report saying, hey, here's the things we found wrong with your device, and, to the software manufacturer or the maker of the ELD. And they will say, we need to get those fixed. Now, if they ignore it, they say they're going to give them about 72 hours to fix these problems. If there's no response, that will likely get them revoked because they have no interest in getting their device updated and compliant. So if you're interested in seeing one of these little files, that they send, check this article out. Click the link in the show notes there. But, it says little things can clue them in, like engine hours should be recorded in single decimal resolution. So in this example, there's a number on here. I don't even know what it means, but it says 9.89. Well, I guess everything is supposed to be listed in a single decimal resolution. So just something small like that. Another thing they pointed out here as an example was personal conveyance should be recorded to 1/10 of a degree, and they've got it listed to 1/100 of a degree here. So just little things like that. You have to be compliant with certain things to make it easier to read for everybody. These guidelines are set forth by the FMCSA. And if the ELD provider does not do that, then they're going to get called out on it. And if you don't respond, like I said, you're going to get revoked. And that kind of sucks. So the article goes on to talk about, how to tell if the ELD you are using is going to be revoked. Well, first and foremost, he says that if you can edit drive time in any way at all, it's not compliant and it will be rejected one of these days. So, you can edit a little bit of that with the old AOBRDs, but not nowadays. He also said another thing to look out was for these white label ELDs. Now, what is meant by that is, say, it's a device that is made by one company, but lots of different ELD companies use the same device. They just brand it a different way. They put their name on it and they might change the color of the device or whatever, little small things about it. And the problem with that is that what the FMCSA is going to do is when they see the problem with this, they're going to send it to the maker of the ELD. But if the white label company who owns that ELD doesn't get the notice, they might not update their device. So just be looking out for that. And he says the last check here is just to make sure that your device is always up to date and that it's timely. If you have an ELD and you haven't seen a software update on it in a long time, you might want to check that out. Always go to the website and see if there's new software that needs to be downloaded or anything to keep the device up to date. If you have any questions about that, call your ELD maker and see if you're all up to date. Check that software. So anyway, like we said before, there is some grace period when you find you have an ELD, but you don't want to be in that position, do you? I mean, I don't want to be running an ELD that is out of spec because, well, that's going to raise the eyebrows of the DOT officer, and I personally don't want that in my life. I don't know about you. Check out all the details on this one at overdriveonline.com. All right, let's stick with the topic of the FMCSA rejecting stuff. Overdriveonline.com. FMCSA rejects another hours of service exemption as split sleeper flexibility is sought. Okay, that title wasn't confusing at all, was it? All right, we've talked about here quite a bit how different drivers are filing for exemptions from the ELDs or, well, not really from the ELDs, but from the hours of service. They're trying to prove that we don't need these hours of service, and every one of them are failing. There's been more rejections lately than I've actually reported on, but this is yet another one. This is the one we talked about from Wayne Moore Jr., and he was requesting an exemption from the 10-hour off-duty rule, the 14-hour driving window, the 30-minute break requirement, and the 70 hours and 8 days limit. He did not ask to drive more than 11 hours in an on-duty period, but that was rejected outright. We expected that. Everybody expected that. But here is a new one, a new exemption that's being forwarded to the FMCSA. And this one is a driver named Matthew Kilmer, and he is seeking a waiver to allow him and other truck drivers to shorten the required 7 consecutive hour sleeper berth period to 5 hours to accumulate your required 10 hours rest. And that's under the split sleeper berth rules. So I don't know if you remember this, but, in the last time they adjusted this, they added the split sleeper berth and they had an 8 and a 2 and a 7 and a 3. So, you could take a 3-hour break and it would basically be a pause on your 14-hour limit. Well, this gentleman is saying that does not work for every driver. Some drivers don't even, they talk about how some drivers feel fully rested after 6 hours, and it's just kind of pointless for them to be sitting around waiting on the 7th or the 8th hour, or let alone a 10th hour. So he's saying, let's just add in this next one a 5 and 5 or a 6 and a 4, or, keep the 7 and the 3 and the 8 and the 2. Boy, lots of numbers there. So if you have comments on this, if you're one of those people who likes to run 5 and 5, a lot of teams used to do that back in the day when I first started. They would run 5 on, 5 off. The Evil Overlord and I never did that. We always stuck with like a 10-hour cycle, basically. Just, she'd run 10 while I was sleeping and I'd run 10 while she was sleeping, and we just kind of kept it going like that. But 5 and 5 was very popular back in the day for sure. So the FMCSA is requesting comments on this, as anytime there is an exemption request be made, the public has a right to comment on it. So starting on February 23rd, that was yesterday, Thursday, you can go to this. There's a link here in the show notes. Well, I don't have a link to the actual comment thing, but if you go to this article, you will see the link to the regulation down there. Oh, heck, I can just add that really easy. So you can just go to the show notes. Let's make it easy on you. Ooh, glad I looked at that, because that link in the article here just takes you to the generic Federal Register website. So I have actually found the one and stuck the actual link in the show notes. So go there. So if you have comments on this and you have a preference on, and you think 5 and 5 or 6 and 4 should be a thing, go over here and say so. All right. Found that article on overdriveonline.com. Okay, here's one of these stories that is, just a general news story telling you what's going on, but I find something deeper in it that disturbs me or I don't understand. Found this one on ccjdigital.com. That's Commercial Carrier Journal, which the website has been behaving lately and letting me in without having me sign in 8 million times. This one is called Brake Light Manufacturer and Fleets Seek Factory Level Exemption. Okay, so what this is it's a flashing brake light that can be added to the rear of a semi-truck. And the idea is it will flash, several times, like 5 times really fast, like within just a second or two, and, kind of wake up the person behind you saying, hey, this truck's getting ready to stop. Don't rear end me. Well, a carrier you might recognize, a tanker company called Groendyke Transport, they have added this and they keep getting tickets for it. So they eventually requested their exemption to the FMCSA. So I guess despite getting all these tickets, even more tanker companies were adding these flashing lights to the back of it. And eventually the FMCSA granted a blanket waiver to the national tank trucker carriers, which allowed them to install a red or amber brake light that flashes when brakes are applied. So now here is the part I don't understand. Now, apparently this pulsing brake light thing, one company that does it is called IntelliStop. I think we've talked about it here on the podcast before, but I'm not sure. But anyway, they produced a module that just attaches to the nose box of your tractor trailer and, patches in some wires there, and it will make your existing brake lights flash 4 times in under a second, and then they'll glow steadily after that. Now, here's the thing I don't understand. The FMCSA will give you the ability to do this, but you have to install it yourself. But they will not allow a trailer manufacturer to install it at the factory. Now, this is the part I don't understand, because if they say it's safe enough for you to install it yourself, but not the trailer manufacturer, I don't get that. Because the trailer manufacturer is not going to probably give this for free to anybody. It's just going to be like an add-on. And all of these companies, according to this article, seem like they're fine with that. Hey, well, if we don't want it, we won't pay for it. If we want it, we'll add it on. Trailer companies are just like truck companies. You order the things you want on the tractor. Maybe you want a spare tire holder on the trailer, and maybe you don't need it. Maybe you want to mount a chain rack back there or something like that. Whatever you need, they will put on. But in this case, for whatever reason, the FMCSA has decided that, nope, you can't have that done at the factory. And I just don't understand it. But, hey, let's just chalk that up as one of the many things we don't understand about the decisions that the FMCSA makes. So anyway, if you're interested in this one and what's going on with this whole exemption thing, and I think they're getting a lawsuit against them on this. So if you're interested in all of that, head over to ccjdigital.com. Government stupidity and bureaucracy. So frustrating. Sticking with exemptions, found this one on landline.media. This one involves the Driver Apprenticeship Pilot Program. I'll put a link to that. That's the FMCSA's new program where they're trying to get 18 to 21-year-olds into the industry to be able to drive interstate trucking. That's across state lines, but only if you have, meet certain requirements and all that stuff. And right now, one of the requirements for that is you have to have a CDL before you get into the program. And that's what this exemption is all about. There is a company out of Pennsylvania called Pitt, Ohio. You've probably seen their trucks around. They are asking that part of the requirement be waived. And they're saying, by making a driver or a student get a full CDL before they enter this program is kind of weird. And I guess that makes sense. My friend driver Chris Mack, he used to train drivers over at Prime, and he said when they had trainees, they would just have their learner's permit, basically. And, they would give them the training, and then, after a period of time and so many hours behind the wheel, they would give them their actual test, and they would get their CDL from that. Now, that was for drivers over 21 or 21 or over at the time, that could drive interstate. So that's all this is really asking for. This exemption is just saying, hey, let us do that with 18 to 21-year-olds too. Honestly, I don't have a problem with this. Now, landline.media does come from OIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association, and they don't like the idea of 18 to 21-year-old truckers at all. They say it's going to have a negative effect on safety. Well, maybe not. I just don't believe that, because I don't think there's any evidence. I haven't seen any evidence that 18 to 21-year-olds have wrecks any more than anyone else, at least in trucks. Because right now, if you are 18 to 21, you can drive a semi in a state. So the percentages, as far as I have been able to tell, there's not a higher percentage of 18 to 21-year-old drivers who have wrecks than, drivers of an older age. So I don't know. I seem to be fine with this. Like I say, they can vote, they can join the military and die for our country. I think we should just trust them with a truck interstate, especially if they are already doing it, or, especially since we're already trusting them to do it within state lines. What's the difference? I've said this many times. If you're driving around in Chicago, what's the difference whether you can cross into Gary, Indiana? Who cares? It's the same thing. It's kind of ridiculous to say, hey, you're not experienced enough to drive these wide open highways out here, but you can drive in downtown LA all you want. That doesn't make any sense. So anyway, if you're interested in this one, go check it out on landline.media. It'd be interesting to see if they let this one slide. All right, I know we have talked about this next story on a past episode, but I think it only involves a couple of these states. This is on landline.media. Lane splitting rules pursued in multiple state houses. Lane splitting is what we refer to as an insane motorcycle going down a dotted line in between traffic. So if I remember correctly, Arizona and California were changing their rules a little bit and adding... I think Arizona was adding it for the first time. California had already been able to do it, but they were adding some other, some changes to it. Well, we got Colorado in here, Oregon, Tennessee, Virginia, Washington, and my home state of Missouri are all adding, or they're trying to add lane splitting to their state laws. So I'm not going to go into the details on each of these. I'm just going to say start looking out for these insane motorcycle riders who drive down in between the traffic. Now, obviously, the state law is not permitting these guys to go 60 mile an hour down through the middle of traffic. And by the way, I say these guys because no woman is stupid enough to do that on a motorcycle. It's only a dude who's going to do that. So, yeah, there are supposed to be speed limits when you're doing that. For instance, the state of Missouri here says that you can't go more than 25 mile an hour while you're doing it. So, there are limitations to it. So a lot of these riders who are doing this are doing it illegal anyway. But anyway, just a heads up, be looking out for motorcycles. We should always look out for motorcycles anyway, but even more so now with these new laws possibly coming into effect. Check this one out on landline.media if you want more details about it. All right, this next story from CDLLife.com surprised me, although, well, I really don't know why it should surprise me because I don't eat in truck stops very often, and when I do, it's usually not a TA or a Petro. I just don't go into those truck stops very often. Nothing against them, just I usually fuel at a Love's or a Pilot, typically a Love's nowadays because I like their app a little bit better for getting the pump started. But that's not what this story is about. TA debuts new full-service restaurant concept called Fork and Compass at Ohio truck stop. Didn't know this existed. Apparently this restaurant has been open since the beginning of January, and it is in the Petro Stopping Center in Perrysburg, Ohio. I don't have the mile marker for that one, but you know where that is. It's just south of Toledo, right off of 80 there, off the toll road. So anyway, what's so special about this Fork and Compass? Well, it's a completely redesigned restaurant. You can see in here where they, in the article, there's a photo of it. It looks more modern. They've got the bar up there for drivers to sit at. They've got, booths. They've got tables. They've even got a big community table if you have a large group of people coming in there. It's just kind of a different environment, but they also say they have changed up the menu quite a bit. They say they're going to be open for breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days a week. It's going to feature appetizers and unique options, including a mac and cheese bar. Well, you had me there. And they're going to have some healthy food offerings recommended by the Cleveland Clinic. So I have put a link to a PDF menu in the show notes if you're interested in what kind of food they offer, but it looks like it's a more variety of food. It's just not your standard fare. Like, I'm not a fan of Country Pride at all. That's the restaurant that's typically in TA. Never had much luck there. We'll hope this Fork and Compass is better. The food certainly looks better. Of course, food always looks really good in a menu, doesn't it? Until you actually get it on your plate. And, well, taste is a whole nother thing. So we'll have to see. So to sum up, I think this is a Trucker Grub in the making. Somebody needs to get over there to the Petro in Perrysburg and check this one out and send in a review to truckerdump@gmail.com. A Trucker Grub is simply a 3-minute or so review of a restaurant that you can get to within range of your truck, whether it's a short walk or whether they have truck parking. And, well, Petro certainly has truck parking. I would do this myself, honestly, because I'm very interested in that mac and cheese bar, but I am just not through here at these times of days when these places are open. So just kind of, I got to the Burrito Junction place down there in, where is that? Corbin, Kentucky, I think it is. I got down there twice, but it's open all night long. And this does not look like it is going to be. It doesn't really say it's not open 24 hours, but it says breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days a week, but it does not mention 24 hours. I'd be surprised if it was 24 hours, honestly. But anyway, just thought you might want to know there's a new Fork and Compass, and if it's good, I hope they replace all of the Country Prides. Again, not a huge fan of them. Check out this article, cdllife.com, and get over there and make me a Trucker Grub. Get on it. And lastly, I would just like to point you to an article that when I read it, it reminded me a lot of myself and the writing that I used to kind of do on here. You know, sometimes I'd have a big, long, drawn out story for one tiny moral of the story. And that's exactly what this is. Found it on overdriveonline.com, and it is written by a gentleman named Long Haul Paul. You might recognize that name. We've talked about him before. He hosted a podcast called Over the Road, and it was an 8-episode podcast. I listened to about 3 of those, and they were really good. They start back with, well, let me go over here and look. I have it popped up. Where'd it go? There it is. Yeah, the episodes, you know, they start way back at like, the history of trucking. They talk about some of the big conventions that go on. They talk about kind of the day in the life of the trucker. They talk about home time, questions, frequently asked questions about the trucking industry. Looks like episode 6 is here even just about our Punjabi brothers, which is, there's a lot of Indians in the trucking industry out in California that makes up most of the California Trucking Association, as a matter of fact. So anyway, this is a really good podcast. It's really well done, very well produced. If you know anything about podcasts whatsoever, it was produced by Radiotopia, which is a really And they've got a great reputation in the podcast industry. Very, very well done. So if you haven't checked this out, I'm going to go back over here and finish this one up because it was very interesting. I put a link in the show notes to the Over the Road podcast so you can go check it out. Or you can just search for it in your favorite podcast app. It's called Over the Road. But anyway, this article itself is called We Don't Give Directions, How GPS is Changing Our Social Selves. So again, this touches on the subject of GPS and how it's taken over and we don't give directions anymore. But it's really a interesting story about his trip to a cheese factory and one that he had his wife along with. And it keeps branching off into cheese and other stuff other than the actual part of the GPS, which I loved. It was very reminiscent of the type of writing that I used to do. So if you like that kind of stuff, head on over here. Long Haul Paul is still doing it while I'm stuck over here doing the boring news. So thank you for that, Long Haul Paul. Really enjoyed the article. Had a couple of good laughs out of it for sure. Head on over to overdriveonline.com for that one. So I guess that will about do it for the news, but the show, of course, is not over. This time we actually have not only listener feedback, but a Trucker Grub segment.
Give us a bottle of your finest champagne, 5 shrimp cocktails, and some bread for my brother.
What's that?
Sushi.
Sushi?
Boy, some chicken wings have really hit the spot.
This is a tasty burger.
Don't play with your food, eat it.
Well, if you remember from the last episode, we talked about Sean, who was being a giant wuss about, doing an audio comment for the Trucker Grub segment. But, thankfully, driver Chris Mack is an old pro at it, so he took it on. Take it away, Chris.
Hi, folks. Driver Chris Mack back here with you for another episode of Trucker Grub. And this is not my Trucker Grub. It was actually sent to me by Sean, who goes by the name Gear Driven, in the Slack group.
The giant wuss guy.
He didn't want to record it, and I told him that I would. So he finally wrote it up and sent it to me. And I've been a little slacker myself, not getting it recorded and sent to Todd.
Mm-hmm.
But since I'm sitting around today doing nothing except watching the stock market go down,
Ooh.
I thought I'd record it. The name of this place is Campbell's. The address is 9098 West Pinnacle Road in Peoria, Arizona. He says the hours are 8 to 3 Monday through Thursday, 7 to 3 Friday through Sunday. He says, this is a breakfast and lunch joint located at the northeast corner of North 91st Avenue and West Pinnacle Peak Road. On the southeast corner of the intersection is a large dirt lot that you can park your truck in. It is accessible from Pinnacle Peak Road. He says he has had the tumbleweed burrito, the potato cakes, and the biscuits and gravy. Biscuits and gravy. One of my favorites. The burrito and potato cakes were very good. The biscuits and gravy were just okay, in his opinion.
Yeah.
Well, that's a little disappointing.
Yeah, it is.
Anyway, he says he called ahead and asked if he could park overnight, and they said yes. They have signs up that say no dogs, but they let his service dog in, no questions asked. Probably because she's way cuter and better mannered than me. So, there you go, Todd. That's Gear Driven's Truck Grub.
Thank you, Chris. It's so sad sometimes we just have to step up for those who are weaker than us and not, capable of doing things, like recording audio comments. Sometimes you just got to give those people a break, We can't help it. They're lame. I wonder if this is ever going to work on Sean. I doubt it. I think he's sticking to his guns on purpose now. So anyway, I looked this one up. Yes, this is actually called J.D. Campbell's, and I'll put a link in the show notes to it. It's jdcampbells.com. Looks like it's kind of got a Western theme going on here. Your neighborhood restaurant and watering hole. Looks like the prices are anywhere from like $11 to $15, depending on what you're getting. Looks like they've got, like you said, breakfast menu, the sandwiches for lunches. They got some unique stuff like something they call ranch hands here, golden house-made jalapeno cornbread topped with corned beef hash, 2 eggs, our house-made hollandaise sauce on the side. Well, that looks good. Yeah, man. They got frittatas, which you don't see on very many menus. One thing I noticed down here was in the appetizer section, they've got those sweet corn nuggets. Man, I love those things. I don't know what it is about it, but basically sweet corn nuggets, corn wrapped with, deep fried. How can you go wrong with that? So this looks really good. Unfortunately, I looked up where this place is at online. He did get the address right, but boy, is it out off the beaten path. This is a place you're going to have to go find. It's in the Phoenix area, in case we didn't mention that earlier. And it is on the northwest portion of Phoenix. It's out there, like if you go around the 101 loop and you're going on the northwest side of it, it's even further north and west than that. But, hey, looks like a good place to eat if you're ever out in that neck of the woods. Stray off the beaten path a little bit and head on over there. Like you said, they got parking right across the street, and go check that one out. It looks really good. So again, that's located at 9098 West Pinnacle Peak Road in Peoria, Arizona. Phone number is 623-825-9500. And again, I put a link in the show notes so you can go and check it out. I'm actually surprised. For once, we've got a restaurant with an actual website. Usually it's just like a Facebook page or something. It doesn't say a lot about it. So there you have it. Thank you to Chris Mack for sending this in and getting that recorded. And I guess we'll have to thank Sean since he was behind this all. Next time, Sean, put on your big boy panties and step up to the plate. All right? All right, let's move on. We've got listener feedback to come.
Hey, yo, bud, where do you want this load of feedback?
Hey, speaking of dogging listeners and sending in audio comments, I did that to Kool-Aid a while back. Well, Kool-Aid is his name in the Trucker Dump Slack group. His name is actually Trevor Dunkel. He writes in the Trucker Dump Slack group, I get dogged into sending an audio comment and then it doesn't even get used? What the heck? Well, I got to tell you, Kool-Aid, I looked for it and I can't find it. If you sent it, please resend it to truckerdump@gmail.com because I cannot find it anywhere. You know me, if I've got an audio comment, I'm going to play it. Also in the Trucker Dump Slack group, it appears that one of the articles in the last episode actually helped one of our people. That was the one about the tires. Matt McKellar, who goes by Mountain Matt over there, he wrote, the article in the latest podcast about tire wear patterns was interesting. Just a few weeks ago, I had what I now know is thrust scrub angle wear. The inside of one steer tire and the outside of the other was worn. They replaced the tires and are supposedly fixing my alignment while I'm on leave for my surgery. Surgery? What the heck? I didn't catch that the first time I read through it. What's going on there, Matt? You all right? I hope everything's cool. If it's hemorrhoids or something, you don't have to tell me. Been there, done that. Also in the Trucker Dump Slack group, Cece, who we've been hearing a lot from lately, love it. She writes, on one of the older podcast episodes, Todd had mentioned he didn't necessarily like the whole best fleets thing because he wasn't sure what they used to evaluate the trucking companies. As always, I was curious about this myself, and a few days ago I finally ran into something that basically lays out their scoring criteria. I wanted to share in case others found it interesting too. Now, I could not find this. I had CC send this to me directly, but I couldn't find the actual PDF online. But there is a website, which is bestfleetstodrivefor.com, and they have a section up here called Process, and it kind of walks through how they go about selecting these fleets. Apparently, it starts with the nomination from one of the drivers, and it goes on from there with surveys and questions you can answer about your company and what makes them so good. So this apparently is at least somewhat coming from a driver's perspective and not just, from the perspective of the carrier themselves or announcing themselves that they are the best. So anyway, just found this interesting. If you go over here to bestfleetstodrivefor.com and you're not finding that PDF, which I didn't either, if you want that, you can always just email me directly and I will send that directly to you. It has all the questions that are asked on there. So thank you for sending that, CC. If anybody wants that, send me an email, truckerdump@gmail.com. I'll be happy to forward that on to you, courtesy of CC. Also in the Trucker Dump Slack group, William Smalley, who I think just goes by the name William Smalley, just like I go by the name Todd McCann. I guess we're just boring like that. He writes, how trustworthy are the apps that supposedly tell you where weigh stations are and if open or closed? Then also, do any of them help you get around the scales if they're open? CC responded to him, are you already employed? If not, try to work for a company that has DriveWise or PrePass or BestPass. Usually you can bypass most of the weigh stations that way, even if they're open. Also, if you run at night, most weigh stations are closed. Are you planning on running overweight a lot? Yeah. Smackerman wrote, any app is as good as its input. I've always used TruckerPath and it's never failed me. Truck Driver Power also does this, although I think they have less users, and I'm not sure it is kept up to date, but not as up to date, I don't think, as Truck Driver Power. Again, that's all about how many users you have on your app and how many people are actually active who are using the app. So he goes on and says, I've always used TruckerPath and it's never failed me, although you need to have enough mind to check when it was last updated and how long it will be before you actually pass by. Very true. You always want to look at that update. It might say it's got plenty of truck parking spaces, or that the weigh station is open or closed, whatever. You want to check and see when that was last updated. If it was 5 minutes ago, you can probably rely on it. If it was 5 hours ago, not so much. Smackerman goes on, says, CC's right about DriveWise and PrePass or BestPass. Depending on your companies or your score, you will get past most scales. Nothing is absolute, though. As far as routing around, your best bet is to plan your route accordingly and look ahead. If you have a CB, you might get lucky and just follow some others. My best advice would be keep it legal and you won't have any worries. Yeah, that was kind of my point too there, William Smalley. What are you hauling there? I don't think any company is ever going to make an app that is going to blatantly help you get around the scales because it's illegal, and they might be able to get in some trouble for that. I don't know if they would or not, but I think that's probably such a small sector of the truckers out here nowadays that they are probably not going to make a feature like that just for a small group of people who want to bypass scales because they're being naughty and running overweight. For the record, William, are you expecting to run overweight a lot? And if so, what's the story behind that? Write in, let me know, truckerdump@gmail.com, or just put it right there in the Trucker Dump Slack group and I'll share it in the next podcast if I remember to do it. So if you're out there listening right now and you think you know of an app that actually does this to help bypass the scales, let me know, truckerdump@gmail.com, and I will forward the information on to William. Or hopefully he's listening. And lastly for today, and honestly, I'm all caught up except for, let's see, I got a Trucker Grub next round from Victoria. Well, we now know her name's Victoria. She goes by the name One of a Kind. And if Kool-Aid gets me that audio comment, we'll have that. But for now, let's finish up with David Taylor. He writes, Hey Todd, you're still my favorite podcast. Aww. But I must admit I listened to Trucking for Millennials today. Well, it's okay. You can listen to other podcasts. He says they had a great interview with Roland Bolduc. I'm not sure if I'm saying that name right. He's a 2-time Grand National Champion truck driver. which he says I didn't even know was a thing. He says, my wife and I listened to it, and ironically, the competition for the states starts in 2 weeks in Baton Rouge. Anyway, if you're looking for an idea for an interview, Roland would be a great option. My wife and I also listened to your Evil Overlord podcast together and really enjoyed that one as well. I hope to stay out of your way. David. Well, David, I drive a really, really, really slow truck, so I'm thinking about changing the name at the end, or changing the slogan at the end of the podcast to say, and I'll try to stay out of your way. That's probably way more appropriate. You don't ever really need to get out of my way. Unless, of course, you're driving like an idiot, or, it's raining, slightly raining, and you got your flashers on. Get out of my way. So anyway, I'm going to recommend this podcast if you like trucking. These two hosts have a good time. They're both millennials. Now, we like to say millennials like it's a bad thing a lot of times, but we got to remember millennials are now in their 30s, having kids and everything now. So, it's not quite the same, but they just wanted it sounds like they just want a, fun podcast that covers trucking industry related stuff. And they had a great interview with Roland over here. It was very interesting, them talking about how the National Truck Driver Championships work and all that stuff. I didn't know a lot of that. So it was a very interesting interview. About an hour long. Go over and check that one out. I always like to promote other people in the industry when I hear them doing good things. So check out Trucking for Millennials. It's a podcast that's been going on for a little while now. Go check it out. Just look for Trucking for Millennials in your favorite podcast app, or I will put a link to it in the show notes if I remember to do so. Now, I hate to completely ignore what you suggested there, David. You said maybe I should have Roland on the show. Don't really think I need to. It looks like they covered it pretty well. Interviews, as I've said in the past, if you're new to the show, maybe this is new to you, but interviews are a pain in the butt to set up as an over-the-road driver. I don't know how these millennial guys do it. Maybe they have a more set schedule. I'm not sure, but for me, I have a weird schedule, and then I'm trying to schedule it with a person who has a weird schedule also. So scheduling these things are a nightmare, and then having time to sit down and record them, that's not awful, too awful bad. Sometimes my interviews go on for a couple hours and I'll edit it down a little bit. Sometimes they go on really long, like the one we have with, Trucker Smack about, the first 6 months of truck driving. Some of those go really, really long, but, podcasts, or not podcasts, interviews, man, they're fun. I really like to do them. They're just very time consuming, and they are very hard to set up. So like I say, if somebody put out a good interview with Roland here, I'll just point you to that one. You can go over and check it out. And I would be curious if anyone who listens to this show has actually participated in these truck driving championships. I've never even tried because I know I'm not anywhere close to being good enough to do these. From the description they were talking about in there, I do not even want to try some of this stuff. So just go over here and check out Trucking for Millennials and you can see what I'm talking about. So thank you, David, for that suggestion, and just keep on listening to Trucking for Millennials. And it's okay if it's even turns out to be your favorite trucking podcast. That's fine by me. So with that, I guess we're done. According to my recording time, this podcast may not have been quite as short as I thought it was going to be. I guess that would be mostly thanks to Chris and, well, sort of Sean, who turned in a Trucker Grub segment, and then all the people who submitted for the feedback segment, which some of you probably don't even realize you were going to be in it. But hey, if you put something in the Trucker Dump Slack group, just be prepared that it may show up in the podcast one day. So with that, I guess I will just wish you all adieu. I hope you're doing well out there. I hope you're doing safe. I hope you're making lots of money. And I hope this crappy economy is not affecting you and your family in too bad of a way. So with that, let's get out of here. Have a good week. Okay. I told you about the new Help the Show tab in the menu bar at abouttruckdriving.com last week, so instead of gold digging again, let's focus on how you can help the show without spending one dime. One way is to promote the show each week when it shows up in your Facebook, Twitter, or Slack feed. Just repost it to your friends and say what you enjoy about the podcast. And of course, you can always tell your trucking friends and colleagues about the show. And obviously, you can always help by listening yourself and following the podcast in your favorite podcast app, which I know you're already doing, right? So with that, I guess there's just one more thing to say, with a slight altercation. Until next time, drive safe, and I'll try to stay out of your way. Howdy doody, trucky dumpers. Yeah. So anyway, what else? Well, I'm not going to California should not set nations. Wow. The FMCSA for an exemption from the requirement that participants must hold a commercial driver's license before enrolling in the FMCSA's Safe Driver Appreciation. That's bad. Explain what you're talking about, idiot. Why FMCS? How trusty? He writes. How trustworthy are the apps that supposedly tell you where trucks? But anyway, I finally found an article that kind of was. It's an interesting. What the hell?